Well, hey! You know, as much as I can't stand the cold, it's very overcast and dreary, and it rained really hard this morning. And it's like that kind of perfect Halloween day. And it lends towards the whole world, at least this part of the world, is quiet, and it lends towards deep introspection. I'm in deep thought quite a lot. If I'm not writing or working on something. Someone asked me earlier today, so why isn't your booklet done yet? It's like, I don't know. I see, I've got several jobs and I work 7 days a week. I like it when people complain about free books and articles that I write, and of course they're all free. Yeah, I was having great introspection. Sometimes, you know, I'm penetrating thoughts on subjects that are deep and important, and see the big picture and the simplicity of everything. I've kind of joked endlessly that nature is, you know, the hairy armpit chick, you know, with muddy feet and no calculator. And this is really true. I mean, it's not specifically true, of course. It's meant to be analogous so that people can see that simplicity is divinity. And everything is really, really simple in nature. And I'd actually like to take a look at the whole picture here and let you grasp something. And of course, I was giving a talk to some wonderful folks and now friends down in Naples, and I was sitting there with this chalkboard that they ordered for me, and it was, you know, my arms were covered in chalk, and I was having a good old time, and I was talking about magnetic seed exposure and polar objects, i.e. magnets, and polar molecules, i.e. water, which of course is the basis of life, and you know, how you can influence one with the other and get drastic results, and talk about qualitative water versus quantitative water. But field unification. I've unified light and matter, and once a capacitance threshold is reached, we have circular frequency and we have hydrogen. And all atoms, whether it be gold or silver or uranium or lithium or iron, or compounds, of course, of the hydrogen atom. So, unification of light and matter. I actually predicted that many countless years ago, and a year and a half ago it was discovered that constructive interference between two super powerful lasers produced fundamental matter. I'd like to go over some simple things. And it's all this nonsense we had. Of course, the ancients of the Greek and Egyptian world, they had lodestones, which are actually quite impressive. They're not as impressive as these. These are artificial lodestones, but they're nearly as powerful as about like an N30 or N35 Gaussian flux on these little egg-shaped magnets that actually come from China. And they were fascinated, and people and human beings specifically, when they're talking about fascination of the magnetic field, what they were fascinated from since early ages was instantaneous action at a distance. And by the way, and this is very funny, and it's 100% accurate, you can go look this up if you don't believe me. Relativity slash quantum, which of course is a pseudoscience. It actually is a pseudoscience. They will tell you, this is not me saying this because it's so crazy. You know, anybody with 2 brain cells, you know, would just laugh their fanny off. They say, well, magnets are emitting virtual photons, and they're communicating with matter at a distance, whether, you know, to repel or whether to attract. And it's just about the most ridiculous nonsense you could possibly come up with. It's as silly as saying that microscopic unicorns or leprechauns are communicating instantaneously. It's just the actual pinnacle of absurdity. So we've had now for many thousands of years, since the ancient people actually had lodestones, so this idea of, well, these are magnets, and when they're actually accelerating together, this is therefore, since they're magnets, this is magnetic attraction. But specifically, magnetism is force in motion. It is multiplicative creation of space. So, like on like, or like north on north, or south on south, is wanting to create space. You'll actually feel this presumed repulsion. That's actually true magnetism. I actually have like on like here. It's not repulsion, it's the creation of space. However, unlike or north on south, or the inversion, of course, of be south on north, one and the same thing, are wanting to actually destroy space. Space has absolutely no properties. The fundamental after effect of a divergent magnetic field, i.e. the toroidal geometry, and of course the actual shape of an apple, even though it's a little bit oblong, is of course a torus. And interestingly enough, it has nearly the same proportionality of an egg, where we have a proportionality if we cut the bisection here. You see the fat section down here, and this of course is where it connects with that which gives it life, from the vine right here. Proportionality of 1/5. Due to geomagnetic precession, we end up with this phase disparity of 1/5, and you can see it underneath the supercell, and it's actually what affects the polar molecule of water to get drastically different results. And it's so fascinating that, like, if you have food in the kitchen, I kind of said this humorously. I never have food in the kitchen, by the way. You've seen some of these videos that they go in, like restaurants, in the middle of the night, like on a burglar alarm call. There's all sorts of scraps of food everywhere. And of course, there's all sorts of bugs, very, very gross. When this is present, that is present. If everything is kept clean, there's nothing to feed on the bugs, there's no bugs. And if there's no bugs, there's no little peeps from the bugs. Of course, bugs leave peeps after they eat. So when you have one thing, you have a multiplicative of other things. Analogously, I'm trying to make a simple analogy here so that people are able to understand it. We actually have the toroidal geometry of magnetism. We have the creation of space, and we have the creation of a measure. And that measure is what human beings call time. Time ultimately does not exist. And then, of course, we have phase disparity, the proportionality of 1/5. But magnetism is the dielectric field. It's no different than talking about ice relative to water. We have this unique word ice, and I just poured some ice in my flavored water drink, and I love it, but, I'm not going to pour water in there, because it's going to dilute it. And, of course, you let the ice melt, it's going to dilute it too. So this is useful. When you have ice, it chills the drink down, and we enjoy it. When you pour water into a drink that you like, of course, it just dilutes it, and it doesn't chill it, and it's not desirable, but these are both one and the exact same thing. I keep saying this, but I think a lot of people don't get it, and I'm trying to actually paint a picture with really, really, really simple analogies, in that magnetism is the dielectric field, and that it has different properties than the dielectric field. The dielectric field, in the loss of energy or inertia, manifests a specific geometry that we call a torus. By the way, my friend sent me this. I'm surprised it didn't arrive broken. And this is from my friend in Naples. This is the inverse geometry, or the negative geometry, just like a film negative. The hyperboloid. The hyperboloid, of course, is the geometry of increasing inertia and acceleration. Of course, we can't take the analogy too far in this hourglass. The sand would actually fall and vanish to the center here, except, of course, it's passing through the center. And it's falling on the other side due to, of course, gravity. Gravity, of course, is an acceleration, or an anti-field. Gravity, by the way, the one thing that I will give them credit for, these pseudoscientists, this nonsense of relativity and quantum, they will flat out admit, the best minds that they have, which is not saying much, they say, well, we have no idea what gravity is. Well, it's not a field, it's an anti-field. Of course, it's increasing inertia and acceleration. It is definitely not a force. It's a complete inversion of a force. Force is the absolute inversion of inertia. Well, if you threw a ball into the air and when the energy was dissipated, it started to fall back towards you, you wouldn't call that an anti-throw, would you? I mean, that would be ludicrously stupid. Yet, the relativists and people actually since Sir Isaac Newton, and Sir Isaac Newton said, hypothesis non fingo. I don't propose a hypothesis for the answer of gravity. And of course, that's the best answer. When you don't know, you don't create something. It's like, I don't know, I really, really, really want to know, but I don't know. So Sir Isaac Newton, as brilliant as he was far more brilliant than these people, I'll call them, in relativity and quantum. He said, I don't know what gravity is. I'd really, really like to know. This instantaneous action at a distance, what is it? Nikola Tesla said over and over again that space has no properties. Space is not a thing. It is literally the negative image of pure potential or inertia, or the negative image of energy. Loss of energy or inertia, i.e. of the dielectric, manifests, of course, this three-dimensional geometry that we call the torus. This is a hyperboloid geometry. By the way, what people call the vortex, actually if I didn't shake up the sand, you'd actually see a little vortex form, a little funnel in the middle of the sand here. A vortex is just half a hyperboloid, yeah? We see things funneling around, and vanishing, and this is the other lobe. This is another vortex, but they're both vortexes. When people say vortex, by the way, simplify things. It should be called a half a hyperboloid or a bisected hyperboloid, but, everybody has a romantic vision. I think most people do. And they say vortex, like a tornado or a hurricane. Even if they're dangerous, we're absolutely fascinated to look at them. And of course, so am I. By the way, if something is diamagnetic, it is super dielectric. Gold, silver, water. Let's simplify things a little further here. And of course, we have the hyperboloidal geometry of the dielectric, increasing inertia and acceleration. Space and time, of course, are unified. These are the after effects of the toroidal geometry of force and motion, i.e. centrifugal force itself. Now, force is not energy. Force, of course, is the dissipation of energy. The three-dimensional force vector that I have a Sharpie marker here. I don't know if I'll be able to draw this simply, but the negative image, of course, of the hyperboloid is the torus. I'll draw a three-dimensional force vector. It would go like this, around, and around over here, and like this. I don't know if you can see this, but this is, if you actually look at it end on, which you can't see this, and I can barely see it, it's actually a perfect circle. So you have a three-dimensional force vector that emanates from right here. We can call this counter space or zero-point energy. We can call it whatever we want, but that loss of energy or inertia manifests as the negative image, of course, of the hyperboloid, this hourglass shape. And the negative image of this is the three-dimensional extrapolation of force and motion and centrifugal divergence itself, i.e. magnetism, which is the negative image of this hyperboloid. So there's only force and inertia in nature. The unification of electricity is really simple. Charles Proteus Steinmetz said it simply in his book, even as phi times psi is Q and Planck of electrification. In other words, the multiplicative of the union of dielectric and magnetic. Specifically, of course, it's the circuit. I hope I didn't interfere my audio. I have the magnets right next to my microphone cable. I'll have to check my audio to see if it got interfered by that magnetic field. Magnets are an issue. I should have known that, but I'm talking and giving a lecture here, and I put the magnets right next to my microphone cord. So when people actually talk about magnetic exposure, and I was talking about this down in Naples, I had to draw out the diagram. I said only true magnetism exists if this were the face of the magnet, which would actually extend out here. This would be the black spot in the center, as you see underneath the supercell, and this would be the actual geometry of the magnet out here. Whether it's circular or square makes no difference. The field is the same. True magnetism only exists at the centrifugal rim. It doesn't exist here if this is the black spot at the center, i.e. the vortex of increasing inertia and acceleration. I've got at least 1,000 videos on the supercell uploaded. You can see that everywhere. You'll say, well, I have it on the South Pole. It's like, well, every pole of any magnet has 3 zones, actually 1 zone in gradations, where actually the force and motion vector exists is at the centrifugal edge of the magnet, actually the periphery of the magnet. You're placing it on the center, you're not actually placing it where magnetism is, because this is not magnetism. If we actually imagine, I don't know, a square here, I don't have a square or a circle here, the actual centrifugal field of the magnetism would be right here. People say, well, I'll put it in the dead center of the south pole of the magnet. It's like, well, you're not putting it in the magnetic field. You're actually putting it in the vortex of increasing inertia and acceleration. Well, it's on the magnet. And analogously, this is kind of the simple way to understand it. When you're in the shower, you have the shower head where the water is coming out. It would be analogous to magnetism. And the drain in the bottom, which of course is falling by gravity. It's not being sucked in, unfortunately, in the perfect shower analogy. But if someone were to ignorantly get in the shower and turn on the shower head, but like kneel down and put their head over the drain, you're not going to clean yourself or, take a shower under the drain in your bathtub, are you? Your shower stall, your bathtub be the one. It's like, well, no, of course not. You stick your head underneath the shower head. So when people actually put the seeds or talk about the magnetism at the center of either pole of a magnet. That's not the zone of magnetism, that's the zone of the dielectric. The important thing here in getting to the simplex analogy, because people will say, well, I'm on the shower, I'm on the South Pole. It's like, you are in the South Pole. But that's like being in the shower and trying to shower yourself under the drain or over top of the drain, which of course would be incredibly ignorant, right? Well, I'm in the shower. That's like saying I'm in the South Pole. It's like, yeah, but in the shower, you actually have the shower head and you have the drain. The center of any and every magnet on Earth, because a magnet, by the way, is a qualitative object of point source field unification between the magnetic and the dielectric. It has a zone right here, and at the dead center of every magnet, that is not magnetism. That's the zone of the vortex of increasing inertia and acceleration towards null point. Yeah? Nobody on Earth that I've ever seen, including a silly video by, someone young would be kneeling down trying to take a shower over the drain. This is the same principle. People say, well, I got it over the South Pole. It's like, well, yeah, saying you're in the shower, but you're not going to shower yourself over the drain. I think I've actually analogized that to death. Anyway, I'm interested in the unification of the dielectric and magnetic and trying to bring these analogies together so that people will be able to understand them. By the way, there's no such thing as a negative charge. If I actually had a circuit between, and by the way, a ground is no different than saying dielectric ground, or dielectric acceleration, or the vortex of discharge. And there's no such thing as a negative charge. That is the discharge portal or grounding. When you ground something like an energy circuit, a circuit that's grounded, you wouldn't call that the negative charge. You call it the ground. And ground is pretty close to accurate. That's no different than saying, well, this is where the energy is dissipated in counter space. So we can eliminate out this nonsense of negative charge. We can eliminate out this craziness of gravity, because gravity, of course, is the erasure of space. Gravity is not only not a force, it is not any type of autonomous field modality. These wackadoodles of relativity and quantum have been working on field unification, or the GUT, Grand Unified Theory. But of course, from the perspective of Mother Nature, in her absolute simplicity with her dreadlocks and her muddy feet, and she's never seen a calculator, and she certainly doesn't use a calculator, gravity is as ridiculous as talking about so-called magnetic attraction, which of course does not exist. Magnetism is not accelerative, it is literally the force vector of centrifugal divergence, i.e. loss of energy or inertia, which of course is the toroidal field. Now, toroidal field is oblong. It is a proportionality of 1 over phi, 1 being the proportionality of the North Pole, and phi being the proportionality of the South Pole. When this is present, that is present. We actually have a magnetic field. Of course, this is the volume. The meat of this torus, of course, is the apple meat that we all love to eat. The actual meat of the magnetic field is space itself. But space has no properties. Space is literally the negative image of pure potential. When you have space, you have masses and magnitudes, and you have measure. Light and matter has been reconciled. I've reconciled light and matter. Matter is just super high energy light at a capacitance threshold where hydrogen exists. When you actually start to fuse hydrogen, you end up with helium. But everything is just a compound, of course, of hydrogen. So field unification complete. Unification of light and matter is complete. The only thing left to unify is the simplicity of the magnetic and the dielectric. They are one and the same thing. It is as ignorant as talking about ice and water. Human beings love to categorize it. Well, this is water when it gets cold and hard. It's kind of like a rock. You can't drink it. It's good to put in your drinks to chill it down. It's one and the same thing. It is a temperature modality of water. Well, magnetism is an energy modality of the dielectric. The loss of energy or inertia manifests as this three-dimensional force vector like I drew right here, basically a three-dimensional S-curve. The extrapolation of this around to the center, around here, is a negative image of this hyperboloid. This hourglass shape, by the way, the geometry is a hyperboloid. It's dual lobal, North Pole, South Pole, or South Pole, North Pole. Doesn't make any difference, and the negative image of this is a torus. The negative image of pure potential, i.e. energy, is of course the creation of space, where you have mass and magnitude. And when you have mass and magnitude, you have what human beings like to measure it by in our concepts, which is time. But time does not exist because it's a measure. By the way, time and quantum are the same thing. Quantum comes from das Lichtquant, which is a measure. A mile, a second, a year, an inch, a gram, a kilogram. These are not things. These are measures. Das Lichtquant. By the way, the tattooed fat bald guy that's making this video that you're watching right now, he actually does know what the word quantum means. I know the whole history behind it, why they used it, how they used it, where the word came from. There's no such thing as quantum any more than there is any such thing as time. The ancient people said this. The word quantum didn't exist back then. They're talking about time. A shadow doesn't exist either. It has no principality. A shadow is a concept reification of a loss, of an absence of light. Necessitatively, of course. Yes, isn't that the case? Time, space, quantum, measures. Shadow is not a measure. Space is, however. Das Lichtquant. This is where we get the word quantum. By the way, Nikola Tesla said, all literature on this subject, i.e. relativity and curved space-time, is futile and destined to oblivion. Let's simplify things a little bit more. Wires are field mirrors. You know, the so-called conductors on the power lines outside your house there? Those are field mirrors. By the way, if it's clear, it's a capacitor. Go look up what a glass capacitor is. Same thing as oil. The oil in those big transformer boxes hanging on your power poles in the backyard or your front yard. That clear oil, capacitor. Glass, capacitor. Air, capacitor. If it's shiny, it's a field guide, or more specifically, a field mirror. Man, does this make it so simple that even a little person could understand, a young person can understand? Well, if it's shiny, it's a dielectric reflector, or we could call it a field mirror, or we could call it a field guide. If it's clear, it's a capacitor. Air, glass, it's countless things. A transformer, oil, capacitor. I don't know if you know what transformer oil is, but you could go look that up. So, have unified fields, have unified light and matter. The only thing left is to unify the literal yin and yang of the entire universe, and I've done that. That's the magnetic and the dielectric. You don't have to unify them. They're already unified. What human beings are trying to unify is their ignorance in understanding what these things fundamentally are. We know ice and water don't need to be unified. They're one and the same thing, but human beings are trying to unify things that are already unified. From the perspective of natura naturans, you could say Mother Nature. I don't care what people say. What people believe in is, of course, of no importance. There's no such thing, by the way, as something being magnetic. People say, well, is it magnetic? They mean ferromagnetic. And this is an important distinction also in actually defining magnetism. Ferromagnetic, paramagnetic, and diamagnetic are all magnetoreactive. Once again, if it's diamagnetic, it's supradielectric. Like bismuth, for example, it's supradielectric. Gold, silver, water, diamagnetic. Everything is magnetoreactive. So every time someone says magnetic, they're confused. Everything is magnetoreactive. It doesn't matter if it's ferromagnetic, paramagnetic, or diamagnetic. There's no such thing as magnetic attraction. Well, these are two magnets are accelerating towards one another. This is, of course, magnetic attraction. Just because that's a correct principle, a correct fact with an incorrect conclusion. This is an error a lot of people make in life, of course. Just because they're accelerating towards one another and they're magnets does not mean that's magnetic attraction, because magnetism is not increasing inertia and acceleration towards the erasure of space. If it is trying to erase space, gravity, so-called magnetic attraction, it is not force. It is the inversion of force. These two vortexes are increasing inertia and acceleration towards a 0 point. Yeah? That's increasing inertia and acceleration. That is centripetal. If it's centrifugal, it is the inversion of energy. This is energy. This is sheer potential. This would be ether, 0 point. Use whatever analogy you want. The inversion and the natural loss of energy is like, why is there any loss at all? That's a question people have. And you actually have to get into discussing emanationism and the extrinsic attribute of what something is. The extrinsic attribute of light, which nobody has ever seen, is illumination. The extrinsic attribute of the ether is this neat little equation. The Pythagoreans discovered that. This 1 over 5 to the power of -3. In other words, the principle over the attribute. This is the greatest simplicity in the entire universe. And the great strangeness of it all is trying to explain such incredible simplicity is quite difficult. It's the reason why there's no translation for ananke, for tolma. Necessity. Well, it's necessitated. Why is illumination necessitated relative to light, principle and attribute? The good and that which the good does is not a correct word. Extrinsic attribute. Everything is unified in divine simplicity. I don't have to have a single thought in my head. I can imagine it all beautifully, and it's awe-inspiring. It'll drop you to your knees. It's beautiful beyond beauty, and I really do mean that. But then you have to use silly words to try to communicate it, and you have to give analogies, some of which are silly, some of which are not, so that people could wrap their minds around it. And it's a problem. But I can tell you right now that there's no greater bliss I've ever had in my life than with no words, with no thinking whatsoever, seeing everything as simple as it is in its own absolute awe-inspiring simplicity. It's simplex beyond the greatest simplex any of us silly human beings can imagine. So, by the way, power in a magnet is translational, of course, upon and to the dielectric. Force, of course, is always expansive, inertia and acceleration, i.e. dielectric, is always contractive. That countless people use the phrase dielectric force or dielectric lines of force is, of course, 100% incorrect. This is an intellectual defect which has to end. It probably won't end in my lifetime. But there's no such thing as magnetic attraction. Unification of light and matter is simple, and unification of fields are simple. They're already unified. It's the clarity of vision and the wisdom and the dialectic engagement of the retroductive loss methodology to see things which are not objective, that you can actually envision them with absolute clarity of that which they are in themselves, of themselves, and by themselves. But communication and using, you know, these silly little things called words, of course, it's a downfall. You know, and I've got a pretty good lexicon and vocabulary from which to extract, but you have to use analogies and you have to build people up to be able to see the simplicity of it for themselves. Because just saying something to somebody doesn't mean they actually grasp it. I mean, that's as silly as saying that if I hand somebody a picture of food, it's not going to feed them. Yeah. As the old Chinese saying, talk, not cook rice. Pictures of food won't feed anybody, and mere words alone will not give somebody the wisdom and insight to see nature in its simplicity for what it is and as it is, in itself and of itself, by itself, without contrivances, without beliefs, but it is absolutely beautiful, and beautiful fails to actually accurately describe it. Thank you so much. I hope you have a lovely weekend, and I'll catch you in live stream. I did 3 hours last night in a live stream. I had fun with people. We were talking, communicating, and throwing back the dialectic back and forth on complex subjects. Thanks so much. Have a lovely week.